The human body in some capacity appears to be more than just a conglomeration of cells, chemicals, and minerals. At what point does consciousness begin to arise within us? And if it's just a numbers game, why aren't other creatures that possess a similar amount of cells conscious? Why aren't the algal blooms that infest warmer waters developing plans to stay alive? Why, out of all the microbes on this planet that form colonies, is there not a space race between them? The reason is, while yes, neurons do hold functionality, we are not all that sure as to if humanity is just the sum of its parts. There's a hypothesis I think we are all aware of, that there is something more to our species than just meets the eye.
Pack it up, pack it in.
But this is more of a supernatural idea that there is, something all around us, as this is known as like God to some, Allah to others, Yahweh, and then other gods with a lowercase g. Just kind of seems to be an ever-present idea to Homo sapiens. The question is why? In the events of phantoms, a creature lurks below the surface of our world, arising only a few hundred years or so to take large groups of humans back to wherever it came from. And for those missing settlements to just become the stuff of legends because nobody knew what happened. With no bodies, no fighting, no evidence that they were even there in the first place, that's really the only thing that is left behind. But what exactly is this thing? Why is its ego beyond anything that we have ever seen, and how did it evolve? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode. But as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. Leave a like if you feel inclined, as it's a personal favorite to me, as it helps the video. Come join my Discord where we watch movies together that end up here. Check out the gaming channel, Roanoke Games. Links for all that stuff in the description. And my new merch will be dropping soon, as the Halloween merch will be going away because it's now November. We kick off our story looking at mountains. Remember when it actually used to be cool in October and November? Man, what a time to be alive. Also, I'm going to impress upon you the severity of how dumb something is real quick. So this is a ski resort town. You must remember this, as otherwise nothing else will seem magical. A car drives up the mountain, barely missing the Dean Koontz words that materialize out of the ether. Nobody really knows why to this day they tend to float around the mountains. As they are headed to Snowfield, Colorado, using the car phone, which is pretty retro, Lisa talks to her boyfriend assumedly, and driving into the tunnel, she loses connection to whoever she was calling. What's more surprising is, I lose signal all the time just driving in the mountains with like a new standard cell phone. How did this phone manage? Lisa agrees to stay for about a month, but it's going to be boring because apparently it's not LA. All right. Is LA really that fun? I don't know. I've never been to LA. Anyways, this is the 90s in Colorado, and apparently nobody has ever lived there, and California is just super fun, allegedly. There's around 400 people who live in this snow resort town in winter, right? But in the summer, when the snow melts, there's 4,000 people. What is that about? So as they drive around, Jenny remarks how usually the town is quiet, but it isn't this quiet as literally nobody is around. Entering Jennifer's residence, there is food burning on the stove, but also again, nobody is there. Looking over, they then spot a woman who's totally donezo on the ground. Jenny says she died suddenly as there was no blood or evidence of a struggle. Touching her hand and not knowing what took her out, very smart. This could be an absolutely insane infectious disease, so I don't know what she's doing. So she runs to the phone, but the phone is out. Hearing something upstairs, they then exit the house, but the car is also dead. Which, of course, it's a Jeep. Walking down to the police station, there is absolutely nobody there, and entering the station, Jennifer says it must be a disease that's taking over the town. Lisa is scared, and hey, those things attached to your pelvis, what do they call them, legs? They are built for walking, just hoof it out of there. Checking the officer's head, it appears a little more melty than it should be normally. However, he got off 3 rounds at something but didn't manage to take out anything that was attacking him. Grabbing the pellet dispenser in the back, just in case, they then head out further into the abandoned town, which, take a left and walk out of there. Also, kind of crazy that they coordinated filming this whole thing and they kept everybody inside, but they discussed that something had to have caused this. Jennifer cannot figure out for the life of her what would make this transpire, but obviously it's a little concerning. Moving back out over to the car that was running before, it has been cut off and will not restart. So, moving around to the back of the building, well, this doesn't look creepy at all. Hearing someone is above them and then run inside as they are looking for 2 people named Jacob and Anna. Finding the hands from Jurassic Park, they have been cauterized, which makes very little sense as to why this is the case, as the timer for the oven goes off. Don't open that. Of course, then again, who listens to my advice? Opening it, they assumed, hopefully it was just a bundt cake. However, bleeding happens and then a few heads drop down. Where did those come from? The phone then rings, scaring the holy hell out of both of them. Answering it, Jennifer asks what it wants as a distorted voice says absolutely nothing, and then walking up to the front, someone is behind them. Looking around, it's what's left of the police force. Oh, thank God, depressed Batman is here. Stu then checks out the heads in the back, acting a little weird, as Hammond wants to bring in more people. Jennifer says it's a bad idea, as whatever is here can be toxic. Hammond then yells, saying he's in charge as they begin their walk through the town at night. Hearing a whistle blow in the distance, they have no idea what is causing that, but all the alarms in town begin going off. Yeah, you ever think maybe you're just being auditorily overwhelmed so that you don't pay attention to what's running around behind you? The power then goes out as Stu starts walking off into the darkness. As we come to find out, again, this guy's just straight up bizarre. He keeps saying that he's all right, but then again, this isn't normal behavior, so I don't think he's doing all right. So continuing their walk through town, they then enter a hotel as Stu asks where they should start. 4 rooms upstairs are booked as it's the off season in winter in a ski resort town, which should be when they're primarily making money during this time frame, right? So as they discuss the town's poor economic decision-making skills, they hear music upstairs as they go to check. Entering the room, Stu then enters the other door, kicking it open, making as much noise as possible. Can we possibly make any more noise? Huh, I guess so. Hammond then rounds the corner and then almost domes a youngling, except psych, it was a flashback to some traumatic past where he domed a youngling. The other two then come upstairs with the other deputy as Stu clears another room, finding an older woman is laying there. She's donezo and appears quite melty. Hammond then turns off the music as he checks a locked bathroom door, I'm assuming. Alright, so Stu sits next to this old woman talking to her, right? He asks if she wants to tell him what happened here. Touching her skin, Hammond asks what Stu is doing, as Stu is, again, a bit of an odd bird, and he starts laughing, and literally, this dude, like, there's no ethereal issue right now. He's just absolutely, it's so off-putting, but it's like too off-putting, right? Like, I get it's his character, and this is typically the type of actor who plays this role, but good lord, it's like a caricature. Anyway, so Hammond then tells him to watch the hallways as he requests Jennifer join him in the bathroom because the door was locked from the inside, but whoever was in there is clearly not there anymore and there's no window. So where do they go? Maybe they just lock the door and then close it on their way out. I've locked myself out of plenty of rooms in my own home before. So written on the mirror, inside is Timothy Flight, the ancient enemy. As Stu walks down the hallway, he enters another room and finds a ton of valuables on the bed. One guy suggests that maybe it was like the Nazis because they didn't leave anything of value behind, as then they find a pacemaker, and that sort of suggests this is just one big pile of melted people, but alrighty then. So Stu keeps laughing about weird things as Lisa suggests they were led here on purpose. Then they find the hand on the table with the lipstick near Stu, who once again is acting weird. They hear a woman screaming as the other deputy then runs outside and gets picked up by something. Depressed Batman then calls out requesting the feds, but the radio starts breaking up. So it's quite interesting, as something we need to highlight to begin kind of forming a semblance of an idea of what this thing is even doing is how it may communicate to a degree. As we have seen, not only are vehicles no longer starting up, but the phone lines can be tapped into, hallucinations can be seen, and radio frequencies are disrupted. What this seems to indicate is that this creature is producing an electrical field of influence to a degree, and this could prevent the solenoid in the vehicles from properly starting a car, which means maybe if you find a manual car and then roll it down a hill, you might be able to start it, though the distributor may also be involved as well as the battery, so maybe it won't work at all. But the same electrical field can also tap into the phone lines and disrupt radio signals. Really, though, all a phone does is convert compressional airwaves into an electrical signal that is then converted or reconverted by the other phone into compressional airwaves to be understood by your ears. By using an electrical signal between the two phones, you can definitely have it interpreted by another phone as a voice. However, it appears to be not all that clear, but what I do find interesting is the hallucinations we will see later. Hallucinations and mirror neurons may be intrinsically linked in something like schizophrenia, but to understand these hallucinations, we need to really understand what they even are in the first place or how they happen. It is typical for people to think that hallucinations stem from an overactive brain, but really, that's what we call a seizure. Hallucinations actually stem from a depressed brain. Well, depressed in terms of function. In Brodmann areas 17, this is the primary visual cortex, and this is responsible for simple visual hallucinations as they are known. These typically present as flashes or geometric shapes. However, Brodmann's area 18 and 19 in the visual association cortices are responsible for complex visual hallucinations, which may cause people to see other people or scenes that look and appear real, but are not. Typically, this type of hallucination is associated with unchecked progression of schizophrenia. Now, why schizophrenia? Well, first, schizophrenia typically results from an enlargement of the ventricles in the brain. The ventricles, of course, being where the cerebrospinal fluid flows. So basically, if I remember correctly, this is like waste removal, but also cooling of the brain takes place here. But within this area, it is known that mirror neurons are nearby. So what are mirror neurons? This is a highly interesting area of the brain, and for the love of God, take it with a grain of salt, but this area of the brain could potentially hint at a developing sixth sense, as it is called, which would basically be kind of, I guess, psychic in layman's terms. But prior to talking about that, at its most basic form, mirror neurons support appreciation of like self and other boundaries, They're basically social neurons, and they are thought to make what we are, us essentially, and we're highly sociable, and they actually activate when we see someone do something or that we socially interact. Now, this social interaction is interesting because it is said this is where we get our gut instinct about others. Looking for minute changes in expression in other people, this will give you a feeling about somebody. So, I'm not being a douche about this. Take Mr. Beast, for instance. I just saw this the other day. When Mr. Beast smiles, if you basically cover up the bottom part of his face, you don't actually see him smiling with his eyes. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and diagnose anybody with anything because that's not my job. But the point is that if you look at him smiling, a lot of people say they might feel off about it, like something isn't really like making sense, so to speak. And it's because typically you'll get lines around your eyes when you smile or you smile for real. So those would be your mirror neurons activating because something about what you're looking at is off to you, and like it kind of gives you a sense of unease. Those mirror neurons are supposed to do that when you're interacting in any social situation because you're looking for very, very fine lines. While consciously you may not be thinking about it, parts of your brain are unconsciously thinking about it. Now, where this begins to take a stranger form is a mirror neuron activation concerning the idea of reading another person's mind. Like, don't click off. This is actually an experiment that was conducted. So you remember Ghostbusters, the first one, at the beginning when they were trying to read the cards and the guy was getting it right but getting shocked anyways, and the girl wasn't doing it right, but Dr. Venkman just wanted a date? That was actually a real test that they did. The test was conducted, and there were those who were successful in doing so beyond just what could be considered coincidence. The areas of their brain that would light up were areas with known mirror neurons, or the location where mirror neurons are, and in those who were just guessing, they had more activation just behind their prefrontal cortex, indicating that they were thinking about it, not feeling it, so to speak. And I mean, this type of stuff with like the speculative neurology goes beyond just me being a crackhead. Like declassified CIA documents of people mentally breaking into completely hidden Soviet structures, and only after the Cold War, it was concluded that they were confirmed correct, and they actually did describe the place almost perfectly. It's stuff like that that makes these mirror neurons very interesting because, again, it's outside of just physical biology. There would have to be something else happening. I mean, the reality of these situations, and this is completely off topic, but it could really just come down to something as simple as how does the universe actually function? What is the fabric of reality? How much control do we actually have over that? And while right now it may seem absolutely insane, typically things that are deemed magic was just science back in the day that we didn't understand. So this could be something that right now it's like, okay, that's ridiculous, but it may just be something that we as a species don't understand at this point in time. But these same neurons can also be affected by electromagnetic fields, which, goes hand in hand with the visual hallucinations in conjunction with schizophrenia. So you can begin to see why people might be seeing the things that they're seeing, more so depressed Batman. Anyhow, back to the movie. So after failing to call out, they then hear distorted sounds over the radio, which is the same thing Lisa heard on the phone. Stu looks super jazzed about them being on their own for some reason as depressed Batman asks what Stu's problem is, like the guy's been trying to pick a fight the whole time. Yeah, this dude is definitely infected. No shot he isn't. He placed the hand there. I'm calling it. So a fight almost breaks out as Stu keeps baiting him into an argument. So future Roanoke here, I'm glad you didn't take that bet. Turns out Stu's just a complete clown. Well, maybe. We'll discuss that later. So the phone then begins ringing as they hear these same distorted sounds from earlier, but it sounds like something whispering. Batman then asks who it is as they hear a groan, and then the line cuts. The power then goes off as something is at the window. It looks like a bird as it starts trying to break through, which then they light up the window, where there goes all your hearing and ammo. Highly intelligent, guys. A for effort. So now with that giant hole in your defenses, Stu approaches the window saying it won't be coming back. Stu suggests that they shot it 30 times. How do you figure, sports fan? That thing dropped out of the way and you guys just kept firing at an open window. So it then flies in and pins Stu to the wall, mortally injuring him as then it flies back out. So you're telling me this whole time Stu was just weird as a baseline? I refuse to believe it. Boarding up the window, they then keep it out as they check on Stu. So further future Roanoke here, I forgot his head gets basically eaten. So again, confirmed, he's just weird. So it ate through his face, his eyes, and his entire brain. Lisa then starts talking about how this thing is the devil and it came up from hell because it wants to dance with them. So Lisa's officially tripping. Like, what are you talking about there, gal? Meanwhile, over in a city, it's raining. Some guy writes on his typewriter as he drinks. It's Dr. Flight. The FBI approaches him asking about articles that he's written about an ancient enemy. The FBI requests that he come with them as it's a matter of national security. And that's how you end up in a basement listening to the Meow Mix song on repeat for 45 hours straight. Back over in a ski resort town whose tourist season's in the summer when the snow is all melted, Hammond then talks to Jennifer, making a pass at her. As water drips from the sink, okay then, Jennifer then asks what Hammond is doing there if he was with the FBI, driven insane by the Meow Mix song, no doubt. So in the past, Hammond domed a youngling because he was hiding in a closet and had a toy handheld, and I mean, terrible, but you did have to make a choice, right? So Lisa comes over and says she needs an escort to the bathroom. Clearing the bathroom, the water keeps dripping as Lisa then drops a cigarette, which is long for Garrett, as then she hears something in the sink. So, quick question. I've always heard that Dean Koontz kind of steals Stephen King's ideas. Is that true? Because the singing in the sink, right? Like, isn't that it? Anyways, so then she hears a toilet flush, which is not an ideal situation. Approaching the stall, nobody is in there. Closing the door, Stu is now back up in action. And oh Christ, he's as weird as he's ever been. So Hammond then checks the bathroom, but nobody was in there, as Lisa says, yeah, he was in there, as they go back into the body room to find all the meat suits are gone, which is definitely not ideal. Hearing a helicopter overhead, they then run outside, but it passes over as clearly there's nowhere to land on a road with cars and power lines and buildings. Like, where did you guys expect him to sit? Anyways, Hammond then says it's just reconnaissance as a private jet is now delivering Dr. Flight to the area. He then talks about how he knows his rights. Yeah, you have the right to listen to Meow Mix for 46 hours straight. Look, man, I'm sure the FBI are cool guys. I don't know, I don't really interact too much with the FBI, and I'd like to keep it that way. Captain Girlfriend is good enough for me when dealing with the government. So anyways, where was I? Ah yes, running to Hammond's car, or the car that was like totally gonna start, but no other car starts in existence, it predictably doesn't start. How did they keep forgetting this? The engine block has been crushed as they hear screaming down the road of someone yelling for help. They decide to go back inside and completely ignore that because it's very clearly whatever this thing is. Meanwhile, outside of town, Dr. Flight is being brought in to deal with whatever is causing this issue. Although, surely they could have slowed down just a little bit when entering this area. Like, they almost totally wrecked this dude who was operating the fence. Also, shouldn't they be getting their credentials checked? This could be some random for all they know. So they talk about what the ancient enemy actually is, as Dr. Flight talks about how 3,000 soldiers in China back in the day, during like the Ming Dynasty or whatever, disappeared with no bodies ever found, just their camp and food. Thousands of Mayans also going missing. Wow, don't know what that southern accent was. Anyways, thousands of Mayans going missing, and no mass graves or evidence of any attack was ever found, just a missing society. Another colony, Roanoke actually, which is what this channel is named after, also went missing. And what happened to them is still speculated to this day, although we're pretty sure we know what happened. Dr. Flight then says it's chaos in the flesh, something took all of them. Entering a carrier, the general then talks about how Dr. Flight's name was scrawled onto the bathroom wall, really just the mirror, so his theory must be right. Back in town, Hammond talks about how if they keep their heads on straight, their eyes and brains within those heads, and their face, meat, and skin firmly attached to their heads, they will be fine. He's also lying, but apparently luck is on their side. As lights flash, the carriers have arrived, bringing in the feds. Oh, thank God. The government is here, we're saved. Listen, I get it. They do a good job. Obviously, you can't just have chaos and anarchy. I get it. So anyways, as they approach, Hammond then goes out to meet them. Flight then talks about how the outbreak is going, and it's going badly, and they're trying to figure out what the threat is. Nuclear, biological, or other. Hammond is evidently leaning towards other, as he says, which I'm gonna have to disagree with you there, big dog. This is definitely a biological threat. As then they check out the bodies, they find evidence of something infecting them. It's very clearly biological. Entering the church, they find the priest as well as at the base of the statue of Mary, a large amount of metal objects like rings, necklaces, TV remotes, whatever. Flight then says it's not an offering, but undigested remains. In the sewers, they then find the phone lines were breached through a pipe, which is how this thing has been communicating. Another group then begins hearing singing in a mechanic shop approaching the sink. Brother, where is your countermeasure? Oh, wait, no, he's with the science team. As someone who was also a part of the science team, I'm just gonna tell you this, stay strapped or get clapped. Reaching out at the drain, he says, oh, it's nothing, as then he gets blasted in the face by raw sewage. Tasty. So as everyone moves through town, they then break into houses and attempt to find anyone who's left alive. One man still has reactions to light, but completely constricted pupils, which indicates brain damage. Like, how did they not notice this at all? What sort of science team are you? Drawings of creatures are all over as they look down and realize the guy is gone and standing at the door. And this just raises further questions. Like, do you guys not have peripheral vision? Anyways, back in the sewer, the creature has shown up as one guy rips off his mask to look at it like an idiot before being dragged back further into the sewers. Like, why waste time removing your face mask and helmet. Just run, brother. So the guy up top also gets dragged in too, because after hearing that, he decided his best course of action would be to keep his face right near the hidey hole. And back in the church, the doors open up as a quadruped shows up. Flight asks how the dog has lived through any of this, as one guy then pets the dog. He's insanely jazzed to see it, as Flight tells him you might want to get away from that dog, as then it starts tearing open. Its spine and skull comes out, as the guy gets stabbed through his head, with everyone else getting speared. Flight is left as the soldier then lights up the scientist, but it does very little to fix the problem. The soldier then gets tendrilled and then lit on fire somehow, as it's just Flight who's left. The scientist gets back up and they approach him and talking to him, they tell him to do his research and write the gospel. So aliens? Not sure yet. Back in the sewer, Flight then comes running up, telling them it's here and all around him. The ground then begins sludging as the general gets invaded. Ouchies. Flight then took off his suit for some reason, while the general, I don't know, I think I would be more stunned than anything, but then the general stands back up. He took off his suit while the general's being infected. There we go, I forgot to finish that thought. Anyways, he stands back up and pulls out a piece of his helmet, spitting a salamander onto the glass. So now that we have seen this thing and quasi what it is, we can tell quite a few things about it. First, it's a mass of flesh that is able to mimic any species it comes into contact with. And this indicates that it is in fact cellular, so it is organic. And this can actually be accomplished relatively easily concerning the actual transfer of information. Assumingly, this creature will absorb whatever creature it comes into contact with, and that is how it rebuilt Stu in the bathroom, I guess you could say. But the weird bird thing that attacked, that was strange, but it can also build a gecko. So it seems it can build either creatures that don't even exist or just build ones that do exist. Now, also, I'm not really sure why I called that thing a salamander earlier. 37 betricologists have entered the chat to tell me that I was wrong. Regardless, I'm not a nerd, you're a nerd. So the stealing of information really just comes down to its genetic coding and how it is able to utilize that information that it has, obtained. By using the genes of clearly some absorbed gecko in the past, it can then take on the shape utilizing several different genes such as the FGF12 gene, GRM8 gene, TLX1NB gene, and of course, who could forget TRAP1 gene. Actually, you can forget all those very easily because it's just a collection of letters and numbers, but these genes are responsible for all those things concerned like BMI, weight, height, waist to hip ratio, the literal physical appearance that you take on, at least so in humans. So it's assumed geckos likely have a very similar set of genes responsible for their own body. But this blueprint for a meat suit would allow this piece of flesh to form a creature of similar structure by reading this information, which means there must be some compatibility based on how it expresses genetic information. So the blob then leaves, allowing them to keep the piece of its flesh to study it, as it tells them not to try to leave as they need to witness the miracle. This thing is so arrogant that it actually left a piece of itself, which we were actively trying to kill anyhow, under the assumption that we would not find a way to destroy it. This arrogance is actually its downfall. And you're not gonna believe where it gets this arrogance from. It's quite hilarious. So Flight then grabs the ever-melting gecko as he begins to study it. Hammond asks why they aren't dead yet, and Jennifer suggests it just needed Flight, so it left some of them alive. Flight thinks it could be like a flatworm, or at least some sort of amoeba that can mimic any animal it comes into contact with, which is sort of correct. Testing the flesh appears to live deep within the earth and lies dormant from time to time. The flesh appears to haunt humans and then can assume whatever form it wants and also absorbs anything that they knew as well. Flight begins to postulate that potentially this thing is what resulted in the end of the dinosaurs. Continuing the analysis, the computer begins telling everyone that Jesus loves them, unfathomably based, as the creature hijacks a speaker function and then tells them to tell everyone the end begins here. This thing is known as Baal. Basically, they are demons. They can suck these balls. It goes on saying it's Lucifer and that God and Christ cannot save any of them. The Christ Chad versus the demonic virgin, some would say. That's what I'm saying. Hammond then asks why they killed this. Oh, by the way, in the book, the reason that it basically goes all religious is it absorbed a Satanist. Very interesting stuff. Again, the Christ Chad versus the demonic virgin. So Hammond asks why they killed all of these people, and it says humans are cattle. This thing has got a bit of a god complex, if you can tell, and you may be asking, where's this actually coming from? Hilariously, it is the human ego. As it absorbed animals, it was fine. However, once coming across humans, it began to develop this ego and became more like us until it finally absorbed so many humans, and with it our intellect, that it was overwhelmed by the human homegrown classic, which is inflated self-importance. This issue would continue to grow as it consumed more and more humans until it became so egotistical, it dropped off a piece of itself, assuming it had no weaknesses. Hammond then asks if it'll let them live. If they do what it says, it elects not to say anything, but really, it just sees them as pets at this point. Look here, egotistical blob, you can pet these nuts. Yeah, it's even funnier the second time around. So Hammond suggests the thing has lived too long without fear, so it's time to remind anything that thinks it owns the planet that this is our planet. You know, actually, I think it thinks it owns the planet because it absorbed humans, which means humans are the only creature who thinks that we own the planet. God, I love humanity. Truly. Time to nuke the soil. Anyways, running another analysis, they suggest its ego is what makes it vulnerable. The lab continues to be attacked while the military mobilizes outside. Also, why even rock the lab? As we'll see here in a moment, it doing this makes very little sense, and for some reason, Batman's also injured from falling against the wall lightly, as everyone is pretty sure they're totally boned. Lisa suggests that they are still trapped, as she says she doesn't want to go to hell. Look, I get it. Egotistical blob or not, it's not a soul-stealing creature. It's kind of hard to claim the ethereal. Anyways, finding out what it is, Flight then says it's a petrolatum, as he pronounces it. So I'm going to pronounce it that way as well. A much more complex and composed of a longer list of minerals and chemicals than the cells in the human body. So it's basically inefficient. Gotcha. See, that could be egotistical too. Get me in an Xbox Live lobby with this thing. It's going down. So basically, it's just a hydrocarbon life. So what does that mean exactly? Well, I think I know what sort of life specifically to actually classify this as, and it would be highly interesting as it's seemingly multicellular, and actually is. However, you wouldn't call it true multicellularism like eukaryotes are capable of. So getting a good look at this thing, we can see it's quite complex, almost like an amoeba, which is a very, very old form of eukaryote. However, given that it is composed of more minerals and needlessly complex, you can almost think of it as a bit less refined than our cells. More minerals and complexities in reality means it hasn't downsized into efficiency, and its critical time frame, and given where it lives, would indicate to me that it is in fact not eukaryotic in nature, not prokaryotic because it's too complex, but it's actually an archaea. What is that? Well, you can think of an archaea, I mean, it is its own form of life, essentially, or branch of life, but it's kind of like a mid-step between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. They have much more complex DNA replication methods than prokaryotes, but they're not as refined as eukaryotes. Their genome structure contains more information than bacteria, but not as much as human cells. Where they delineate into their own is the unique lipid structures that they have in their cellular membrane that allows them to live in extreme environments that both prokaryotes and eukaryotes would have either difficulty living in or we just wouldn't survive in. And this is going to be stuff like oil. Amoebas, while loving water and soil, are not too fond of petroleum. However, archaea absolutely love petroleum. And this is a sort of an interesting idea because, again, if we approach this idea with the mid-step mentality, while prokaryotes can live in colonies, they're still very much so individualistic, making them less functional as a unit concerning the drawbacks that they have, and eukaryotes form actual legitimate multicellular organisms, with their drawbacks being that our cells pin our whole survivability on other cells. The archaea organism, the ancient enemy as it's called, is this mid-step. And also, I just want to point out, there is some bacteria that is found in petroleum. Anyhow, so while their cells are individual still somewhat, pieces can then break off and mimic others like life forms such as stew. Horrible choice to mimic this guy, but you kind of get the idea. Their drawback doesn't align with survivability, but as we will see, there is one major one that is an absolute vulnerability. So opening the microbe's storage door, Flight then finds something as the command post calls out to the ski resort whose off-season is during the winter. Outside, the scientists have returned to convert everyone. Flight then pulls the microorganisms, a bacteria that eats oil and can only exist in an oil-rich environment, but then goes away and is completely harmless to humans. For now, life adapts. Their plan is to infect the blob with this, and it reproduces evidently every 11 seconds, which is absolutely wild, which I get that is total crap because the fastest doubling bacteria that we know of is Vibrio nitrogens, which doubles its time or doubles in about 10 minutes in ideal conditions. There are quite a few different bacteria that also eat petroleum compounds or hydrocarbons, but none of them have the ability to double their numbers inside of 11 seconds. We would have absolutely no oil left on the planet if this was the case. And we would honestly use it like one time and it would grow wildly out of control. So the major ones are Marinobacter, Oshinospiralis, Pseudomonas, and Alcanivorax. I believe that's how you pronounce that. But these can survive off just oil, so I'm assuming this is the bacteria that is going to be tasked with actually taking down this egotistical blob. But back at command post, it's totally wrecked, but nobody will know until summer anyhow. Back in town, Hammond then exits out of the lab, which so far has been pretty successful in keeping the creature out. And as he walks to the other lab, the quadruped starts growling at him. Opening the door, Hammond then backs into the lab as Copperfield shows up. He opens his mouth as distorted sounds are emitted, and I mean, so far they haven't done anything to you. This thing hasn't done anything to you. Grabbing a handle, the sound then begins again as Hammond turns around and Copperfield is gone. Grabbing the suitcase, he then heads out and walks past the dog. Again, is this thing trying to take them out or not? It seems to be just sort of vibing most of the time as Hammond says, "Oh, I only want to tell the world about you," as then the dog's transformation stops. Entering the lab once more, apparently this is, an all-knowing creature, but it doesn't know humans can lie. Considering it absorbed many humans, it should know that we are totally capable of that. Seems like a pretty large flaw in its plan there. So entering the lab, the quadruped continues to watch as Hammond closes the door. So as snow finally starts falling in the ski resort town that closes in the winter, Flight then asks a valid question. How do they propose they do this? Sending Flight out, the blob is in love with you, bro, so you're the ideal person, and you're also protected for some reason, and then walks out and he tells it that he's there, his witness. He says he needs to see all of the creature, not just a small piece. So Flight comes out saying again that he's like, "We're producing a countermeasure to you." And he says, "Death is for mortals though, and not for gods." He then tells it to show itself as gods have nothing to fear. So after stroking its ego a little bit, he then adds, "Well, maybe you do have something to fear." Ah yes, the concept that if you're going to make an infant cry, you have to first give it something so that you can take it away so that it cries. So the entire town then arrives without him noticing, which is rather interesting, as their breath then forms the creature in the middle, and we finally see it in all of its glory. It's a big blob. The rest of Team Human then comes out and fires a bunch of these things into the bacteria as it lets out a beam of light. It is infected, but it's not dead yet. It begins its attack as then they run to the police station as it goes back underground to run away. Hammond enters the sewer system to give chase as Flight stands back up with Hammond making his way through raw sewage. Lisa and Jenny get attacked by Stu, who has... He's just, again, I can't put it any further. He's just weird before his infection. Like, just shoot him. So then they light him up as he's slumped over, but he's not dead. His legs begin changing into a squid monster thing as Stu continues being weird even post-infection as they blast through the roof and escape. Just remember, it absorbs your essence. So this dude made the creature that much more strange. So Stu begins throwing up as clearly he's dealing with some sort of issue. Down in the sewer, Hammond continues to going after the thing as it's thrashing around. As Lisa and Jenny then crawl across the attic, Stu shows up, looking even more unhinged. He asks what they did to him, saying, "Did you slip me a Mickey?" Oh, God, that is a data term. Anyways, they blast him in the face, as then they get rid of the rest of his face as he begins melting away finally. So he just sort of melts in on himself as now Hammond sees the youngling that he domed, or at least a version of it. I think the thing was trying to throw him off. So he gets knocked down as the creature says he's going to let Hammond live with him forever. Okay. So finding the syringe, Hammond then shoots it as it covers the offspring in bacterium. It then starts completely freaking out as the yelling can be heard all over the town and then suddenly ends. Back up at the ski resort town that is closed during the snowy months, Hammond reports back that it is done and all the souls are at peace. Flight says he's going to go tell the world about the creature, but the earth still endures. Flight then gives an interview about intelligence down below our feet, and he wonders if it's actually gone or if humanity will go extinct over it. In a bar, the two are kind of just talking about how Flight's a crackpot as Stu is also there. He says, "You want to see something interesting?" as evidently the creature did in fact not die, and it chose the weirdest guy to represent himself, and thus concludes Phantoms. So what is the possibility that this thing can actually exist? Well, given that it is highly likely to be archaic, at first, it would exhibit a level of intelligence based on the interconnectedness of its own cells, and while individualistic, they can possibly be more capable of communication between cells than just say prokaryotes can be, but it appears to me that this is a mid-step and it would be rendered a threat, but it's not really all that intelligent. Potentially just having the ability to be like any predatory animal, and given its interaction with eukaryotic organisms over time, and from what we can see with most animals, its level of intelligence would actually not have risen all that higher than what most animals on Earth normally are. That said, when it came across humanity, these new eukaryotic cells arranged in such a way that our level of intellect was achieved. This allowed the archaea to reorganize themselves in a way that allowed for it to become more intelligent, but still, it's just mimicking human intelligence. And it's not even actually all that intelligent. In fact, actually, I think it would get most of its basically social cues and like what it's doing from mirror neurons that has basically gleaned from other brains. But blinded by a form of intelligence, with it being the ego, it did not maintain the balancing paradigm that humanity has within itself, and so it's really not all that smart, it's just pretending to be smart. Once absorbing a whole town, many different thoughts, feelings, mirror neurons, and ideas would be absorbed, giving itself the illusion of knowing our kind, but it really doesn't. So because it was mentioned that it is saturated with hydrocarbons, something probably like bacillus was likely used in order to consume the hydrocarbons, thus rendering the archaea inert and dead. And this would take time, and the entire time this was happening, this thing would be running its mouth, but ultimately it would do its job. It is just highly interesting concerning like a thought experiment to try to figure out what life would look like if an archaea went full on multicellular. As far as we know though, it never has, but this would allow it, however, to live in more extreme environments, but be predatory as it is because it's actually predatory in its naturally occurring single-celled state. And while it would appear somewhat like a eukaryotic organism in its original form, it'd very likely be a blob given that it's reliant somewhat on itself, but it has not achieved full multicellularism, which means it does not need to differentiate like eukaryotic cells have, and thus it was just really not likely a pressing need. So to wrap this up, this could all be summed up in one thing. It was man who was made in God's image, not you, creature. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like to be greatly appreciated as it gets the video out there, and subscribing lets you know when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Roanoke Games, and Roanoke Tales channel links in the description, as well as my Patreon. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, thank you to our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys. Next, I'd like to thank our scientists, Eris, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, Official Texan, and Felix Hellstrom. Thank you guys as well. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys. Your help goes a long way towards keeping everything running smoothly and is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.